All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am very excited, inshallah, to continue our tafsir. So let's just really fast. You could say yesterday I was reading farther than what we had done, but let's look at what we did last time. قل أندعو من دون الله ما لا ينفعنا ولا يضرنا ونرد على أعقابنا بعد إذ هدانا الله كالذي استهوته الشياطين في الأرض حيران له أصحاب يدعونه إلى الهدى ائتنا قل إن هدى الله هو الهدى وأمرنا لنسلم لرب العالمين. So certainly we went in some details about the word قل أندعو من دون الله ما لا ينفعنا ولا يضرنا. This is basically the word projected at the disbelievers. Are we going? This isn't an interrogative clause, but this is more of an exclamation. So this is an exclamatory clause, basically telling them, well, why would I do such a thing? Why would I worship something that doesn't have the benefit, the ability to benefit itself or even harm anyone? Certainly it can harm us if we would be worshiping it, but it itself does not have the power. So it's nothing but an object and therefore does not have any power to control anything in the universe, anything in the world, therefore nothing on nothing on my life as well. وَنُرَدُّ عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِنَا. In other words, if we were to do that, even though we had chosen to become Muslim, embrace faith, then we would be going back to basically square one in the choices that we had made. In other words, we would, after crossing and after passing this long road to going towards success and achieving this far in embracing hidayah and embracing guidance, we would be going back to square one, as if it's basically going back to the point that we started out from. بعد إذ هدانا الله, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guided us. كالذي استهوته الشياطين في الأرض. Now this, of course, this gap right there, this would be continuing, of course, the same sentence, but it's letting them see and in parables. And this is very common in the Quran. You would see these parables and telling us, well, what does this actually look like? What do we understand from this? So hold on, just give me a second. When we see this in Lugha Arabiya, this is very common to use, whether it's figurative language or whether it's a type of a metaphor. And certainly when we see all of this, we basically just learn that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us those patterns, those parables for us to basically have a visual comparison for us to really see it. كَالَّذِي اسْتَهْوَتْهُ الشَّيَاطِينُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It would be similar to a person that the devils or the demons or the jinn basically had invited them on earth to basically wronghood, and eventually they lived in confusion, and they would have a friend that's out there, which definitely they would not necessarily have a close relationship with this person because they had been infatuated by the shayateen, and their friends would be inviting them to guidance, come with us. But then, of course, this person, if that shaitan basically had overcome them, then in that situation, they would not find the ability, the motivation to join guidance. Of course, it depends on what you accept and what you embrace and what you let overcome you, or at least what you yourself would actually have the intention to embrace. قُلْ إِنَّ هُدَى اللَّهِ هُوَ الْهُدَى, and say that the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the real guidance, and we were ordered to submit to the Lord of the worlds. We're ordered to submit to the Lord of the worlds. وَأَنْ أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ. So how do we actually embrace this submission? How do we stay consistent? How do we stay determined? أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْ أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, and perform perform prayer, perform salah, because at the end, you may find yourself basically without the salah, basically recharging you over and over again, you may find yourself that istahwatu shayatin. This is actually very similar to an ayah, I believe in Surah al-Zukhruf. What was the ayah? Remind me of the ayah. The ayah, what is the ayah? Hold on. Let's find that. In Surah al-Zukhruf, it basically وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ وَإِنَّهُمْ لَيَصُدُّونَ عَنِ السَّبِيلِ وَيَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. That's that ayah. You know what? Let me look that one up right there so we can actually see it, because it relates to the ayah that we're وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ. Let's look at that one, right? Let's look at this one because it relates directly to the ayah that we're doing. وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. What is وَمَنْ يَعْشُ? مَنْ يَعْشُ actually means whoever repels away. Let's compare it to this one. This one is saying istahwatu. So shaitan would istahwa. So what does that mean? Istahwa is to basically invoke within you a certain pleasure, a certain desire. But this one is about basically saying that the person himself is repelling away from dhikr al-Rahman, from the remembrance of the Lord Almighty ar-Rahman. Why ar-Rahman, not al-Jabbar, for example? Even though they're all the same names, going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you say yashu an dhikr al-Rahman, because the person would, the more distance they are, distant away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the less hope they would have in life. And the less hope they would have in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person is away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would be more prone to anxiety, to depression, mental health issues, and the list goes on and on. So then, نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. What is نُقَيِّض? نُقَيِّض, it's like something strapped. It's as if the shaitan is strapped on this person, and this shaitan becomes the mirror of that person. As if they had become the mirror. Or is it فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ? Is it the shaitan is the qareen? Or is it that the person that kept away from remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that started mirroring the shaitan? Who's the one that's mirroring right there? So if we are saying that نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانٌ فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ, if we would say that فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ, meaning mirroring, that this person would be mirroring the shaitan and they would be mimicking shaitan, that's accurate as well. At the end, it's basically telling us of a reflection, whether it's the shaitan basically becoming the main teacher for that person, or whether it's that person basically mirroring the shaitan himself. So at the end, the farther the person is away from dhikr. Wait a minute. What is dhikr again? Dhikr is remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhikr is in different ways. There's the oral dhikr. La ilaha illallah, subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. You know, those different words that you can praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. And there's the visual dhikr, taking a moment to just reflect in the world and reflect in the creation that surrounds you, to see the powers and to see the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's the other type of dhikr, and that's the dhikr, behavioral dhikr. Are you putting that into practice? How do you practice your dhikr? How do you make it into something that that speaks of the identity of a Muslim. That's the behavioral dhikr. There's the audio dhikr. What are you listening to? Are you continuously just listening to music? Are you taking the time to listen to Quran, perhaps, or maybe a lesson, or maybe a halaqah, or maybe a dars? There's that audio dhikr. And those that would, and of course, there are more different kinds of dhikr, but those are some of them that are actually mentioned. And the most important ayah that would actually include all these types of dhikr is basically that ayah in Surah al-Kahf at the end. We talked about that one before, all right? We talked about it before. Okay. وَمَن يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. This ayah is basically taking that description in how the shaitan will become the mirror, or whether it's the person mimicking shaitan or the other way around. At the end is that the shaitan would basically be the partner for this person. Now, on the other hand, this would basically say استهوته الشياطين في الأرض حيران. It's quite interesting. If we say حيران, can we say some mental illnesses may be linked to shayateen and not necessarily a chemical imbalance in the brain? This could be an indication, by the way. But certainly psychiatrists are never going to reach that conclusion. There's no way that they can reach that conclusion. Why not? Because whether we're speaking about psychiatry or whether we're speaking about medical studies, they're based on studying matter and not things that are beyond matter. So there's no way that one day they're going to be seeing some shaitan and the effects of shaitan under a microscope, for example, because shayateen are not matter. But if you look at this ayah, for example, استهوته الشياطين, and the letter ka, okay, is actually tashbih. But does that mean, what does it remind us of? It actually reminds us of Surah al-Baqarah. Let's look at that ayah and just say that comparison, okay? Let's see. وَمَا يَقُومُونَ, the ayah says, وَمَا يَقُومُونَ إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي اسْتَهْوَتْهُ. Okay? Okay. Let's see. In regards to those that take riba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, let's look at this ayah. This ayah, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Okay? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, where's that ayah? Okay, here we go. This is the ayah right there. I can't believe I couldn't see it. Okay. الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا. This is what we basically are quoting right there. لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس. I want you to look at this one, because this is the kaf of tashbih, of comparison right there. So what does it say? That the people that would basically take up or eat or basically consume riba and interest, they would not stand but comparing them to those that would be pricked by shaitan, and that's exactly how they would stand. Now, scholars had differences of opinions. What does this remind us of? Exorcism. Is exorcism real? Can it really happen that shaitan can actually enter the body, control the body, or even have any effect on the person's brains or the person's choices? Is that at all possible? Believe it or not, scholars actually had differences of opinions on that. I'll just make the story short because I did have a whole video on that. So why did they have differences of opinions? Because they had differences of opinions on whether a metaphor is actually supposed to be haqiqa or majaz. What does that mean? Is it supposed to reflect a reality, or is it a metaphor to mean it's a metaphor? It doesn't have to be real. It basically becomes a figurative sentence to basically have people relate to something. It doesn't mean that that's what you become. If I were to say she fought like a lion, it doesn't mean that she became a lion. Okay, it just means that this is giving us this type of relationship, that they would be standing like a person that basically is similar to a person that basically a shaitan right there. So when you look at that, that's that area that scholars basically had differences of opinions on, but just keep that one in mind. Does it have to be true? Can it be something that is not necessarily all the way true? How do we relate to all of that? That's that differences of opinions between scholars and how they related to that lugha Arabiya and what that actually means. Now, one thing I would also like to say is that, do we necessarily have the evidence through the text to basically let us know whether that is possible or not? Or are there other different evidences that we can use in order to know whether exorcism is possible or not? Well, there's another ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells us that, quoting shaitan, that he would say, وَمَا كَانَ لِيَ عَلَيْكُم مِّن سُلْطَانٍ إلا أني دعوتكم فاستجبتم لي. I had no power over you. Let's look at that ayah, right? وما كان, we're going to get that one out. وما كان لي عليكم من سلطان. Here's that ayah right there. Let's look at it, right? Let's see. Here we go. وما كان له عليهم من سلطان. Okay, not this ayah, sorry. Let's find that ayah. Okay, here we go. وما كان لي عليكم من سلطان. Oh, it's in Surah Ibrahim. إلا أن دعوتكم فاستجبتم لي فلا تلوموني ولوموا أنفسكم ما أنا بمصرخكم وما أنتم بمصرخي إني كفرت بما أشركتموني من قبل إن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. Okay, what does he say in this ayah? I had no power over you. I only invited you, and you had responded to me. So therefore, do not blame me and blame yourselves. I'm not capable of saving you, and you're not capable of saving me. I had disbelieved in what you had associate partners before in, and the oppressors would have a painful punishment. Okay, so how do we compare these two? So in the first one, you could see that it's actually saying that a shaitan can have a mess. The word mess can mean to touch something. Okay, it means to touch something. And that's that area where scholars debated. Some said, well, to touch something is completely different than entering a body. So both sides, the scholars that said that exorcism is real and those that said exorcism is not real, they depended on the same evidences. Ustaza Umayya, go ahead, dear. What did you want to say?
Yeah, Bismillah. Is it the same mass that mentioned in لا يمسه إلا المطهرون? The same meaning?
So that's it's the same word. There's no doubt. It's the same word, but
That
then, of course, in Lugha Arabiya, remember, in order to interpret one word, sometimes you need to look at the context as well. So they'll look at the context and they'll say, well, this one certainly, yes, it's the same word, but then you had that debate between scholars that said, well, ilmas basically means to touch. You know, that's the same word basically in Surah Al-Ma'idah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically أو لامستم النساء. طب لامستم النساء. Okay, are we going to say that lamasa also to touch? So for a Shafi'i madhab, they said, yeah, even if a man touches his wife just to hand over a couple dollars or probably the towel, whatever it is, just a slight touch, that's it. You got to redo your wudu for the Shafi'i. For the Hanafi, they regarded that, no, lamastum. They said that alif right there means there is a deeper relationship farther than just a touch. And it went basically an exaggerated touch and basically referring to intimacy. That's according to the Hanafi. And they have their evidence, basically, at least the Hanafis. Okay. But is it the same root? It's definitely the same root. But then, of course, in order to understand Lugha Arabiya, sometimes you need to look at one, the root, two, the grammar, three, the context, and four, what is called the sarf, the conjugation, basically. And all those different, and the balagha is also part of that. And how do we understand the eloquence? How do we understand basically all the different sides that all the different sides that relate to that language? Okay, so just understanding and understanding this piece of it is extremely important. So when you look at this one, okay, istahwathu shayateen, and we got right there that shaitan has no sultan, and we also have this ayah that there's a mess. How do we put these pieces together, and how much of a control can a shaitan have over us? That's the question. The first opinion basically said shaitan has no control other than simply doing this type of invitation and not necessarily having some farther control more than that, because the ayah, according to them, is really clear that he said, "Ma kana li alaykum min sultan," I had no power over you. All they could do is really perhaps only get to the borders of touching, the boards of inviting, communicating to your brain, communicating to possibly certain feelings of yours. Maybe, I don't know, can we actually communicate to our feelings? Can somebody communicate to our feelings? Well, that's where, according to, you could see that certain things might actually affect us, and it doesn't have to be through the communication of us hearing the words. That's where certainly things, maybe temperature, noises, even if a person is deaf, they can sense noises and they can sense certain vibrations that are touching them, and even though they can't hear anything. So in other words, can there be other communications that shayateen, we weren't capable of probably tracing those types of vibrations, those types of communications, whatever it is, and therefore they were capable of doing this type of invitation? Is this something that we can at least see the effect of it? Maybe the effect of it, maybe see a person producing maybe a certain chemical in the brain, or certain things happening in their body. Maybe if we were to show them certain bad things and certain good things, what do we see? We already know that studies can actually measure these things. They can measure if they were exposed to a happy moment, how they would relate to it, how their body relates to it, what is actually produced in their body, if they were exposed to evil things, or if they were exposed to probably, let's say, haram things, and you know what I'm talking about, how their body reacts to it. So we already know that we are capable of measuring all of that, okay? But we're capable of, that's measuring the result, but not the influence. So we're not capable of measuring every single influence, because we might have put a certain magazine in front of that person, okay? But we can't measure the magazine. We could only measure the impact it had on that person looking at this magazine, okay? And when we might have, for example, a wrong thought coming in this person, and they can, not until they're vocal about it would we really know what kind of thoughts were coming to into their mind. Was it a project of his own evil side, in nafs al-ammara bis-su', or is this shaitan influence? Well, at the end of the day, we're not going to be capable of measuring whether it's a shaitan influence, or whether it's a nafs al-ammara bis-su' that had been basically accustomed so much to this environment that they basically had started to develop their own evil thoughts. أخت مية, go ahead, dear.
حبيبتي, you mean that مس الشيطان, it's like that, like electric shock, or مس شيطان does not seem like لمس الإنسان, لكن
So,
the influence of mass is what reflected on the person. It's different, not seem like لمس. Is it like electric shock? Something.
right. So,
same the
you
آية
know,
says لا يقوم إلا كما يتخبطه الشيطان من المس.
right.
It's
So
like,
that's another, the scholars that said that no, shaitan's mess goes farther than just a touch. They went in some details, which, to be honest, they didn't have any evidence for. Okay. They went in some details on how that basically happens, and what kind of an influence, and what does it look like, a shock? Does it look like, I don't know, does it look like an incision? What does it look like? Okay.
yeah, because we hear it like mamsus.
What was that?
We hear it like mamsus. When you say some person is mamsus, يعني it means like he has a touch, or
Right. Well, when we say in Lugha Arabiya, the word massa, okay, actually means lamasa. It actually means to touch. Okay. Even though the scholars that go deeper, they say lamasa is different than massa. Okay. Because il-mas is more of a gentle touch, or more of a slight touch. And the lamps is more that there is a physical, let's say, a physical touch, a physical relationship. Okay. So they would actually go in those details, but to be honest, all of those different attempts to give details and explain how they had basically considered that, yes, il-mas, or at least the shaitan, can enter the human body, or exorcism and all of that. They really, like I said, they depended on the same evidence as the other group. That's one. And to be honest, even further, the text itself is rather containing a lot of ambiguity. And both opinions actually have strong evidence, and I would say considerable interpretations. What was the other opinion? The other opinion said that that's impossible. The only thing that a shaitan can do is to have some kind of an invitation, a communication, but not necessarily farther than that. Even when they came across this ayah, they said hayran, they didn't do further than istahwatu, than just really having this type of Hawa, this type of invitation that they were basically giving him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they literally controlled the person. So how did the person go into this type of hayra, this type of confusion? Okay, so the first group of scholars, they said no. Even the word majnoon, they said the word majnoon basically means a person that is a lunatic, a person that is basically lost their ability to control their mind. And the word majnoon comes from the effect of jinn, and basically that jinn, the word majnoon, here's the word majnoon. Let's write that down. This one's quite interesting. Okay, so
Jazakallah khair, Doctor.
so when you look at the word majnoon, they said here it is. It's the effect of jinn on that person. But here's the thing. The word itself, it doesn't necessarily mean that that we're going to fully embrace that any type of a mental disorder is basically an influence of jinn. Okay, because they had, at least at the time, they had considered that the result was the influence of jinn, but that's because they couldn't understand the symptoms. They couldn't understand the symptoms, so they basically attributed to jinn. Do we have to do the same today? No. Can the doctors at all say, hey, this is an effect of jinn, this is what it is, and we're going to say, well, there's no way that they could actually get to that conclusion. There's no way that they can get to that conclusion because that's not what they're trained to do. They're not trained to measure whether it's a jinn or shaitan. You know what? Even those situations that you can do ruqya on, and I myself, to be honest, I didn't used to believe in exorcism. I only started believing it when I was cornered to do ruqya. But then, people would come to me, please, just do ruqya. And I would be, hey, you can do your own ruqya. You don't need me. Please. And, you could see somebody is desperate and you're like, okay, if it makes them feel happy, I'll just do it. And I started doing the ruqya. And then later on, another desperate person comes, and then you see cases that there's no way that science can explain it. There's no way, absolutely no way, that you can actually have in any way science explaining to me how just by reading Quran on this person that they could just simply start vomiting blood. How? They just an hour ago, they were not vomiting. Now this person's vomiting blood. Now this person, their belly is moving like there is a full-term baby in their belly. And it's moving, not that they're moving it, because I dare you, there's no way that you can move your belly. Okay, some women do belly dancing. This isn't like belly dancing. No. This isn't at all like that. This is like, it's like there's a ball inside that's moving left and right. You could actually see it. It's like moving left and right. Or even, communicating in things that, okay, what's happening here? The psychiatrists are not trying to see any of this or even treat any of this. They will just explain it as, well, depression, ADHD, whatever it is, and they'll get you into psychosis and bipolar and all these different illnesses, which usually they depend on reading the symptoms. And that's why they would give them all these medications and keep on alternating from one medication to another, because it depends on the family and what they would describe. And then based on that description, they would come out with the final diagnose that this is what it looks like. And then they would give you this medication. And then you as a family might actually say, well, he's sleeping too long, or she's doing this or that. And then they'll decide to alternate the medication to something else. And of course, and keep on trying to see what will make this person at least get to their normal being. But at the end of the day, is that when you look at كَالَّذِي اسْتَهْوَتْهُ الشَّيَاطِينُ فِي الْأَرْضِ حَيْرًا is one link in the Quran to tell us that some shaitan influence can affect our mental stability. That's that ayat directly telling us that certainly shaitan influence, whether it us basically embracing what they had invited us into, or whether it was basically us accepting at least their words, that it basically will have an effect on our mind and our ability to make decisions. Because the word hayran basically means a person that is confused. Okay. So you say hayran, a person that is confused, a person that is, kind of like psychosis. They're talking to them and then they get all of a sudden so confused about whether something is real or not, because there are all these different words that are happening in their brain. And certainly, psychiatrists would tell you, well, we managed to reduce the things that we're talking into that brain. We managed to reduce the amount by giving them this or that medication, and it basically had an effect. We will say, absolutely, yes, I agree with you that this can have an effect. Does that mean that this is exclusive to a chemical imbalance? Or can this also mean that that shaitan may even control the chemical imbalance, or may even control the brain, or may even control the body? That's the question. Can they control the body? Can they control the brain? That's that area of debate and controversy between scholars. How far can their influence basically affect us? And just keep that one in mind. So, in other words, what would actually help a person that is under the influence of the shaitan influence? What would help that person? Well, basically, here it is. قُلْ إِنَّ هُدَى اللَّهِ هُوَ الْهُدَى. Tell them that the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true guidance. Wait a minute. So are you here insinuating or giving me the inference that every single mental illness is shaitan based, and therefore every single person that is going through some sort of mental illness, that it's a result of them being away from guidance? The answer is absolutely not. No. But this is to say that some of what is classified as mental illness is, a matter of fact, more of a shaitan influence and not necessarily a mental illness. Okay? So this is not to say every single mental illness is a product of shaitan whatsoever. Just keep that one in mind. In other words, some mental illnesses would actually require indeed human intervention with medications and of that sort to basically get them treated. And we had seen, by the way, we had seen cases where I wouldn't necessarily say fully recovered, but got better to a certain extent. They got better to a certain extent, and some were capable of getting back to. Okay, some were actually capable of getting back to work. Some were capable of getting back to their normal being in their marriage relationships and so forth. So this is something that is possible. Let's say it that way. It is something that is possible, and we had seen medical intervention actually work in many cases. Okay. وأن أقيموا الصلاة واتقوه وهو الذي إليه تحشر وهو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق ويوم يقول كن فيكون قوله الحق وله الملك يوم ينفخ في الصور. Okay, let's say this is the ayah that we left off at. So وهو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض. Okay, let's see, right, this ayah. And they were saying, at least al-Qurtubi, before we run into this ayah, forgot to mention this one. Who was this referring to? At least the context when this ayah was revealed. Some scholars actually said that this was actually revealed. Remember, they would istahwatu shayateen basically invited him. He would be confused, and then his friends would call him to his friends would call him to guidance. But then, of course, did he necessarily accept? And we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, and then say that the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the guidance, and we were ordered to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Some scholars actually said that it was revealed on Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr. Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr. Who's Abu Bakr? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. His own son? Yeah, like Sayyidah Aisha's brother? Yes, like Sayyidah Aisha's brother. Okay, and what happened? Well, he was inviting Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to leave Islam. And his mother and father, who's his mother? Rawman bint al-Harith. His mother and father, who's his father, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. They were inviting him to Islam. And that's basically the context. Lahu ashabu yad'unahu. He had basically the friends. But wait a minute, it wasn't a friend, it was his mother and father. Why were they called friends? That was the mother and the father. Why were they called friends? Okay. Because when you say same thing, let's go back to Surah Nazi'at, or is it Abasa? وأمه وصاحبته وأخيه. Okay, صاحبته, that one would basically be referred to the wife, but he wouldn't dare put his mother and father as something that he would sacrifice in order to not to get to Jannah, to get to hellfire. But here, lahu ashab, this is basically to refer that they were companions to him. And they were trying to invite him to faith. But then what happened? He was insisting that he didn't want to enter the religion. Let's see, Abu Umar. Who's Abu Umar? Abu Umar, let's go right there. And he said, for Abu Umar, okay, he said al-isti'ab. Okay. Who's Abu Umar? Sometimes he would use the name Abu Umar, and sometimes he would use the name Ibn Abd al-Bar, but it's really the same person. Abu Umar and Ibn Abd al-Bar are the same person. And Abu Umar is a Maliki scholar, and he was actually called Hafid al-Maghrib. Hafid al-Maghrib. He was considered as the main scholar and the most important scholar in al-Maghrib. What is al-Maghrib? Al-Maghrib, does that mean like the West? No, they used to consider all the countries from Libya all the way to Liberia, all of that in Mauritania, they considered all of that as Maghrib. They considered all of that the West. West of what? Well, west of the Eastern countries. We're speaking about all the other countries from Egypt all the way to the other Eastern countries. They considered that East. Okay. And then the countries, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, they considered it Bilad ma wara an-nahrain, the countries that are farther than the two rivers. Okay. And that would be Afghanistan as well, Pakistan included, all of those. Those would be, they considered all of those as, if you go that far, that's considered that this is after those two rivers. As far as, and of course, China was considered its own, let's say, heavy load, and so was Hind. Once Arab used to see al-Hind as the place of ajaib, as the place of all the strange things that you could ever see. And they considered Bilad al-Hindi was Sind. That's what they called it. Al-Hind was Sind. Sind, basically, no, southern part of India. Okay. And Bilad al-Hind. Al-Hind was including, of course, Bangladesh, was including Pakistan, was including India, all of that. They considered that that area was the most advanced world at the time. Okay, let's see, enough about that. So Abu Umar was originally from Spain, okay? Was originally from Spain. Okay, well, wait a minute. So why did they call him Maghrib, Hafid al-Maghrib, when I thought you said up until Mauritania? You can include Spain with it as well, because that would be Al-Andalus. Okay, so who's his mom? Roman bint al-Harith. And therefore, he would be Shaqiq Aisha. Wait, what's a Shaqiq? Is that different than a brother? Yes, it's different than a brother. Okay, because a Shaqiq, they share the same mom and dad. A Shaqiq, let's see, the sister is saying, so we are were they able to read, engage with the Quran without getting sick like that before doing the ruqya? I guess, let me see. Don't know what, maybe you could explain to me, Maryam, when, or the context of that question. Okay, Shaqiq is different than an akh, because a Shaqiq shares mother and father. So therefore, he would be the, Asma bint Abi Bakr is not a Shaqiqa for Aisha. She doesn't share same mother and father. She only shares same father, which is Abu Bakr Siddiq. Okay, does that make him that step brother? Okay, step brother. Certainly, there's a akh li or akh li ab. If they share the same mother, not the same father, it would be akh li If they would share the same father but not the mother, it would be akh li ab. If they would share same brother and mother, they would be shaqiq. Okay, shaqiq. And okay, let's see. Abdul Rahman. What was that his name? We'll get there. Okay, so Abdul Rahman, he then of course became Muslim, but we're just talking about his early time. Okay, he was in Badr and in Uhud, but guess what? He was actually fighting against the Prophet ﷺ. He was a disbeliever. Yes, he did participate in Uhud and Badr, but he was disbeliever at the time. And he was invited for al-Biraz. Al-Biraz, al-Mubaraza, hal min Mubariz, who's going to start the, basically the first, before the war actually happens. 3 people or even more, they would basically come forward from both armies, and then they would fight in the beginning. Okay, and no one is supposed to intervene. Okay, then Abdul Rahman Abu Bakr Siddiq, he basically attempted to be at the forefront. And then Abu Bakr Siddiq stood to basically fight against him. Just imagine that. Even if it's your own son. That's so, oh my God, I cannot imagine, Ya Allah. But look at the faith in their hearts, Oh my God, I can't, oh Ya Allah, oh my God, I am getting all the goosebumps. Just imagine your own son, and he was willing to actually stand head to head with his own son and actually fight him. You know what that means, to fight him? In other words, it's to put all the effort to kill him. Ya Allah. Okay, let's see. So he told the Prophet ﷺ, his interest in actually moving forward and being the one to compete or oppose or basically fight Abdurrahman, that is his own son. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, Matti'ni binafsik. I want to enjoy your presence with me. Ya Allah. The Prophet ﷺ tells him, Matti'ni binafsik. I want you. Let's see, what does it say here? He wants us to go back at Talkhis al-Habir for Ibn Hajar. So basically just didn't really tell us how authentic that is, but okay. Matti'ni binafsik. He said, I want to enjoy your presence. Then later, Abdurrahman basically becomes Muslim. And he basically hasuna Islam. What does hasuna Islam actually mean? You know, some people convert to Islam, but then they kind of have their moments of tripping away from the religion. In the beginning, they did a good job. And then, you know, a moment of probably not doing the best in practicing the religion. This is not hasuna Islam. Hasuna Islam, meaning that they took the religion seriously. They were committed, were consistent in the religion, and Sahih al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they were companions to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was a companion to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, he was part of the Sahaba. And during Hudnat al-Hudaybiyah, so that was 6-year Hijrah, that was during the Hudaybiyah. And he said, هذا قول أهل السير. Said most of the scholars of Siyar, what is a Siyar? A Siyar are basically the scholars that kept track of the history and the biography, whether over the Sahaba or whether the stories of probably the different stories about the Sirah, about what happened, the story of Islam, basically. Okay, so those would be the scholars that had attempted to do that. But here's a catch. The way that Sirah was studied was completely different in its accuracy than Hadith. Why so? Because Hadith related to the intricate practices that relate to our Islam. That's why you would see the debate and keeping track of the chain of narration and all of these scrutinized researches about whether a hadith is authentic or not, etc. But for Sirah, the same was not done. It was basically told stories, and sometimes the stories with the scholars didn't necessarily keep track of each and every single detail and say, well, do you have an evidence for that? Do you have any record for that? Do you have the chain of narration? Who told you this? They didn't necessarily do the same. And that's why you would find in the books of Sirah a lot that the scholars of Hadith will basically debate whether it's authentic or not. And certainly you would see sometimes even different accounts and different books of Sirah might actually have a different story. That's because they didn't necessarily scrutinize it in a way that it considered the authenticity of that information. Okay, so that's something that al-Qurtubi had basically let us know, that I'm right here quoting from the scholars of Sirah. In other words, he's saying, I'm not confirming all of this. I'm just letting you know that the scholars of Sirah mentioned this. Therefore, I would let you know the resource right there. And they said that his name was Abdul Kaaba. Say what? Abdul Kaaba. That was his name. What was Abdul Kaaba? What does the Kaaba, the black cube? Yes, the Kaaba, the black cube. And Abd means what? Servant? Yeah. His name was Abdul Kaaba. Okay. Then the Prophet ﷺ changed his name to Abdul Rahman. Okay. Then he changed his name. So who are some of the people that the Prophet ﷺ changed their names? Abu Hurairah. And there are differences of opinions on Abu Hurairah. Was it Abdul Rahman, or was his name another name other than, at the end, he was famous for Abu Huraira, but that wasn't his name. That was more of a, I guess, kind of like a nickname, but that was it. But it wasn't just that. Do we have to change our name and Arabize our name? The answer is no. As long as the name does not contain anything haram, any shirk, then it would be permissible to stay and keep that name. I personally recommend, especially for the reverts, you don't have to change your name. If your name is Bethany, keep Bethany. Why not? It's a city in Palestine. It's called al-Izariya right now. It's Bethany. If your name is Elizabeth, your name, George, whatever it is, as long as it's not shirk, you don't have to change your name. As long as it's not shirk. Unless your name is Christina. Christina actually means you're a woman that is considered as belonging to Christ. Okay, so then in that situation, we'll probably change your name and tell you, well, how about you change your name? Do I have to do it legally? Well, that's going to be a whole process. You don't have to do it legally, but at least that identity to be with a Muslim. Okay, now why are we saying that we don't recommend somebody changing their name? Because the Prophet ﷺ only changed the names of those Sahaba that their names contradicted their Muslim identity, like Abdul Kaaba right here. It contradicted the Muslim identity, contradicted the whole the whole idea of La ilaha illallah, that you should be worshiping Allah Almighty, not the Kaaba. And that's basically also letting those that think that Muslims worship the Kaaba. Here's this evidence that the Prophet ﷺ, even for Abdul Rahman, or sorry, for Abu Bakr Siddiq's son, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was named Abdul Kaaba, the Prophet ﷺ changed his name, said, no, that you can't do that. Even though, don't we face al-Kaaba as a qibla? Yes, but you don't worship that. You worship Allah, that's the direction, but not what you worship. Our evidence, Abdul Kaaba, the Prophet ﷺ said this, that contradicts the whole idea of Tawheed. So the Prophet ﷺ changes his name. Now, of course, Abdul Rahman was the eldest of Bakr Siddiq's children, okay? And it was told that of course, when we look at Abu Bakr Siddiq, you had Abu Bakr Siddiq basically had 4 different children. Do you only have 4 different children? Well, that's not actually accurate. لم يدرك النبي 4 ولاء أب وبنو إلا أبا. Oh, okay. So, okay, no, okay, I misread this one. So he was saying that only 4 had basically witnessed the Prophet ﷺ that had a father and basically all the grandchildren there. Abu Quhafa, basically the grandfather, and the son, which is Abu Bakr Siddiq, and the children, Abdul Rahman and the others. They were the only family that had basically become 3 other families, 4 with Abu Bakr Siddiq and his family, that the grandfather, the son, and the grandchildren, that they had all become Muslim. Okay, that's quite interesting. Only 4 families had that. What's the other family, or the 3 other families? Let's look it up, right? Let's see the other 4 families, inshallah. Try to find them. Okay, let's see. وَأُمِرْنَا لِنُسْلِمَ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Umirna, we were ordered. So who are we taking the order from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Umirna linuslima li rabbil alameen. We're taking the order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore to submit to the Lord of the worlds. And let's say, kay nuslima. So what does that mean? Linuslima, that lam right there. Okay, what does that mean? It means to basically, in other words, the purpose of what we were ordered to do is the purpose of our life, that is basically to submit to the Lord Almighty. How do we submit to the Lord Almighty? We submit to the Lord Almighty. So look at this ayah right there. How do we submit to the Lord Almighty? So therefore, semicolon right there. Maybe we could erase this one right here. And there would be this semicolon, even though it's basically the coming ayah, but this would be a semicolon right there. How do we do that submission to the Lord of the worlds? Well, basically, aqimus salah. You would perform salah. You would have religious integrity, and you would be basically in continuous relationship and continuously having that vision that you are going to be resurrected to the Lord Almighty. Okay, so there are three types of lamb. Does that mean every single time that I would see a lamb, then that would mean that that's basically giving me the reason for something? The answer is no. So here it is. The scholar, his name is Nahas, he basically explained, and he said there are three different kinds. There's lamu khafdin, wa lamu amrin, wa lamu tawkid. So that there are three different kinds of lamb. There's one, the affirming lamb. There's the lamb for order, that is the imperative lamb. And there's the lamb that basically gives that kasra, that jar. That lamb that basically gives the inclusion, basically the inclusive lamb that basically includes all the other things with it. So here we go. We got lamb, that is the affirming lamb, and we're speaking about the lamb right here. Okay, we're speaking about this lamb right here. So not every single time that you see the li, you would say, oh, this is actually giving me the reason for something. We would say not quite, because we have certain three types of lambs. We have a lamb that gives me an affirmation, and a lamb that gives me an imperative verb, and a lamb that basically is an inclusive and basically to include all the other. How do we separate? How do we know whether this is this lamb or that lamb? Well, then we would look at the context, and we would also look at the structure in Lugha Arabiya. That's why studying Lugha Arabiya is extremely important. Okay, so when it says linuslima, what does it mean to actually engage in Islam? Let's look at this one. When you say linuslima, what does that linuslima even mean? Does that mean to just become Muslim? Or does this mean to have Islam in general? And certainly got two colons right there. Does that include sincerity? Does that include aqimus salah, performing salah, etc.? So at the end, you could see that this would actually be the aqidah piece of it. Umirna linuslima, to submit to the Lord Almighty in tawheed, and in action, an aqimus salah. In action, you're going to be in ritual worship. You're going to be performing for ritual. You're going to be performing salah. And for your life, because you could legislature, that's that taqwa that you would practice. Remember when we read the ayat, it's always saying amanu wa amilu salihat. Okay, so this piece is the amanu piece, and the amilu salihat is basically including the ritual and also the legislature. What do we mean by legislature? Legislature would include everything that you would practice in life, whether in transactions, marriage, possibly maybe judging, maybe the governance, all of that. That's basically what taqwa. So that would be including all of those different corners. Okay, so when we're speaking about لِنُسْلِمِ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, this is basically including aqidah. This is including ibadah. Let's look at it this way. Let's do it again. Okay. لِنُسْلِمَ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, aqidah, and ibadah, and amal, and action. Or aqidah, ibadah, and sharia. Okay. Aqidah, ibadah, and sharia in general. Okay. وَهُوَ الَّذِي إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ. Let's say, when it says وَهُوَ الَّذِي إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ, why, I mean, we already believe that we are going to be returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's that debate between scholars. Was this directed at the believers? Was this an informative clause, or was this a clause to basically contain in it contain a threat and telling them, if you don't want to basically submit to the Lord Almighty in aqidah, creed, in worship, in legislation, well, just remember that your return is going to be to the Lord Almighty. You have the free will. You can choose to submit or not submit. But at the end of the day, you will be held accountable for the choices that you will be making. That's وَهُوَ الَّذِي إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ is basically saying. So when we say you'll be held accountable for the choices that you're making, this is not giving you information, but this is actually warning you. This is a warning. And Al-Arabi is really intricate. All right. وَهُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ, created the heavens and the earth in truth. Wait, so what do you mean? وَيَوْمَ يَقُولُ كُنْ فَيَكُونُ, and on that day he will say, be, and it is. قَوْلُهُ الْحَقِّ. Man, that's a scary ayah. His words are true. That's so scary. Let's say, وَيَوْمَ يَقُولُ كُنْ فَيَكُونُ, and he said, and that would mean, and remember, on that day when the Lord Almighty would say, be, or it could also mean have fear. When the Lord Almighty would say, be, and the Lord Almighty would basically give that order for what? So when you say kun fayakun, was the order, was the command kun fayakun, qawluhu al-haqq, and his words are the truth, and he would have the kingdom or the ownership or the authority. And then on that day, when the horn is blown into. Okay, so the kun fayakun, who is this referring to? Is the kun referring to the actual creatures? Or is kun referring to whoever's blowing the horn? Okay. So there are differences of opinions between scholars. So kun, they said, well, this is actually talking about the actual creatures, that they would be there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say kun. In other words, the people would basically turn into, from being decomposed substance to then being recreated again into their human shape. That's the first opinion. Okay. And they said, well, that would mean that فَيَكُونْ جَمِيعُ مَا أَرَادَ مِنْ مَوْتِ النَّاسِ وَحَيَاتِهِمْ, that the inference is that this would include whether the life of people or whether the death of people, all of that would be kun, be, whether dead, or be, or whether alive. And therefore, قَوْلُهُ الْحَقِّ, his words are truth. In other words, there's no change in what commandments he would give. There's no alternation. Whatever he would order, it would basically happen as he had basically, as he had commanded. And the other thing, when you say قَوْلُهُ الْحَقِّ, that would actually also mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that he's not an impulsive Lord, and that those decisions will never change. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the order will not change as we human beings might change our decisions later on. We plan to do a certain plan and then we basically change it again. Okay, قَوْلُهُ الْحَقِّ, his words are the truth. Okay, here's another qira'ah. فَيَكُونَ. wait a minute. So which one is that one? Let's look into it, right? This one would basically look into this one. Okay, so the other qira'ah is فَيَكُونَ. So قوله okay. ويوم يقول كن فيكون قوله الحق. The other qira'ah كن فيكون, just like this one. Well, what qira'ah are we doing? This is Hafs an Asim. This one is Hafs an Asim. But Ibn Amir recited it as فيكون. Well, what's the difference? Okay, if you say ويوم يقول كن فيكون قوله الحق, be and it is, so therefore then they would debate فيكون, where's the object? What is going to be as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered it? Is this talking about the horn, or is this talking about the creatures themselves? That they would be, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will order them to be created back to the way that they were created before. The other qira'ah, kun fayakuna, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order everything to be recreated, but then this would basically refer to that things happen as in a fast process. In other words, it doesn't take time. That the Lord Almighty would determine the things fast and would happen ultimately, and would happen as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give the order. So it would be kun fayakuna, meaning that it doesn't even take any time lapse. It would happen, let's say, instantly. And therefore, instantly, whether we're speaking about the accountability or the resurrection. But here's the thing. By the way, when you look at the word يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ, there is another qira'ah, by the way. It's يَوْمَ يَنْفُخُ فِي الصُّورِ. Wait, what's the difference? يُنْفَخ is basically telling me it is blown into. What is blown into? This is the horn that it's blown into. Even though we know, whether through the hadith or whether through, and of course, authentic hadith, or even whether through the previous scriptures, Jewish scriptures and Christian scriptures, Israfil is basically the angel that would blow in this horn. Okay. But here it didn't really give the name. It just said it would be blown into, that is the horn. Okay, but if you were to say يَوْمَ يَنْفُخُ فِي الصُّورِ, therefore you're actually saying, well, he would blow into the horn. Who would blow in it? Well, let's get deeper, at least. We're going to answer that question. يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ وَلَهُ الْمُلْكُ يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ. Okay, so when it says يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ, this is basically taking out the object of who's actually doing it. Okay, and that he would, when it says walahul mulk, he has the ownership, and on that day it would be basically blown into that horn, and therefore on that day that he would basically, it's the day of truth, there's no denial in it. So what is a surah anyways? When you say a horn, what are you actually looking at? What does that horn look like? Is it a horn looking like a horn, the one that Jews blow into, or a horn like the ones that you would have, like maybe the rhinoceros, or maybe an elephant? Is that what it looks like? But well, here he says it's basically made of light, and the first blow is basically for all creatures to basically die, and then the second blow would basically be to bring in and resurrect all people. And let's see where he got that from. He says, go to 3, and let's see, and he said that in one of those references, he said it didn't say that it was made of light. Okay, so what is the other hadith that we have of this? That an Arabi basically means a Bedouin. a nomad comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, "O Prophet of Allah, what is a sur? What is this horn that it is talking about?" And the Prophet ﷺ responded, he said, "قرن ينفخ فيه." It's a horn that would be blown into. And you could see Ibn Hibban basically regarded it as authentic, and Tirmidhi regarded it as Hasan, which is a second degree of authentic resource of hadith. Okay. And here, al-Qurtubi wanted to object to something. And he said, this isn't the plural of image, as some had claimed. So what's the debate here? Some scholars actually said yanfukhu or yunfakhu fi sur, meaning images, that he would blow in the images of people. This isn't talking about the picture that we would have, meaning sculptures, like a sculpture that people would be like sculptures, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically blow in them the souls. But al-Qurtubi objected to that and said that, no, that's not actually true. Why not? He said, because we actually have different records and of the Prophet ﷺ actually telling us that there is Israfil who's going to blow in a sur and who's going to blow in this horn, and that the first blow is going to be bring the dead back to life. The first blow is putting people all to death, and then the second blow is bringing them back to life. So he said the claim that this would be, blowing into the sculptures of the dead, that this was actually false. And he said, we're going to show the evidence to this later on. Okay, let's see right there. Muslim, basically, the hadith scholar, that he basically narrated from a hadith narrated by, what was his name? Abdullah ibn Amr, in a long hadith, but of course, guess he just took out the beginning of it. ثم ينفخ في الصور فلا يسمعه أحد إلا أصغى ليتا ورفع ليتا قال وأول من يسمعه رجل يلوط حوض إبله قال فيصعق ويصعق الناس ثم يرسل الله أو قال ثم يرسل أو ينزل الله مطرا كأنه الطل فتنبت منه أجساد الناس ثم ينفخ فيه أخرى فإذا هم قيام ينظرون. So there's a hadith, a whole long hadith, but we'll just take he just wanted to take this quote. So we'll just stay committed to what he wanted to quote. He wanted to quote this hadith. This hadith is an authentic hadith. And then the horn would be blown into, and not a single person would hear it, but they would stretch out their necks and stretch out really, when you are hearing something, but you're starting to doubt, did I actually hear something? You would stretch out your neck like, oh, or even put your hand next to your ear. Did I hear something? What was that? And they would stretch out their necks. And he said, the first person to hear the horn being blown into, what is that horn blown to? Not everyone is dead yet. Okay. So the first person to hear the horn being blown into is a man yalutu hawda ibilihi, basically giving water to his own camel. He would be the first to hear it. Wait a minute. He didn't talk about technology. So would people one day go back to living the primitive life? I was listening to that other day. Some lady who is a therapist, Muslim therapist, she said Muslims don't have anything to worry about in terms of a nuclear war ever happening, because we don't have any hadith mentioning that there isn't going to be a nuclear war happening. Sorry, but that's not actually true. We don't have a hadith saying that there's going to be a nuclear war, but we do have a hadith that clearly indicate that people are going to go back to the primitive lifestyle. And I mean primitive, we're talking about just like this one. يَلُوتُ حَوْضَ إِبِلِهِ. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ had literally mentioned that there would be people on horses, fighting on horses, people basically going back to the swords, and it's not going to be this sophisticated ammunition. No, it's going to be something rather different, something rather very simple. Let's see. And then this man is giving water to his camels. And then he said, قَالَ فَيَصْعَقُ النَّاسِ فَيَصْعَقُ وَيَصْعَقُ النَّاسِ. That then this man would basically go in this, that because of the loud sound that this horn would make, it would be beyond his limit that he would basically go into a saq. What is a saq? A saq actually means when you would have a very loud sound that it would basically make the person faint. So wait a minute. The sound, the louder it is, does it actually fade away, or does it become something that is audible? Okay. Some sounds, they're audible only if you were a certain age. Some sounds, they're not audible to you, but they're actually there. Some sounds, they're so loud that it would basically be a blast that would make you faint. And that's basically that sound. It would basically make that person that was putting water for his own camel basically faint. And all the different people would, after that, faint after him when they would hear it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are two reports. There's one, ثُمَّ يُرْسِلُ اللَّهُ or يَنْزِلُ اللَّهُ. Is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would come down, or is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send مَطَرًا كَأَنَّهُ الطَّلَّ? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send a rain that is like a tal. What is a tal? A tal is nada. Okay, now you're explaining a word in Arabic to a word in Arabic. You know that, I don't know what it is in English. It's mist, maybe? Yeah, it's mist. You know, in the morning, of course, the air would have, when it's hot, it would be capable of basically taking in a larger amount of moisture. But then when the temperatures go down during the night, the excessive amount of water would basically be seen as mist. It would be on the different things that surround you. Okay, that's that mist. That's a tal. It's that mist. It would be a mist. And then this mist.
I'm sorry, Dr. Aisha. Can the fog also classify under, can fall under that classification as well?
What was that?
Fog.
Fog?
Yeah.
So fog is different because fog can cause mist, but the fog is when it's like cloudy. But this is talking about the water being misty, water, an amount of water basically being present. Okay, so this is not talking about fog. Fog would be like a dukhan, fog would be some like cloudy, but mist would be that there's water, that there's moisture. Okay.
The Prophet ﷺ doesn't mention in another hadith that it's Yamaniyul Rijal.
There is another hadith that actually talks about it. But here's one thing, is that when you look at the different hadith, sometimes the hadith would basically give me different accounts, and that's basically to tell me that there's a process. There's a process, and in the beginning of that process, or is it the end of the process, that it would be like a white fluid, basically as semen, and that this would be what would be raining. And why did it say here as a tal, as a mist? Is that at the beginning, or is this at the end, or what actually comes first? At the end is that the Prophet ﷺ was telling us that there are the different stages. So here in this stage, it was basically saying it would be like a mist, like a moisture that surrounds them. And then people, فَتَنْبُتُ مِنْهُ أَجْسَادُ النَّاسِ. It's quite interesting. Tanbut, meaning that people's bodies would be planted, would grow like plants. Tanbut, it's like they would grow like plants from what? Basically from the backbone. So that would be the seed that would contain all your DNA and all the information. And then this type of mist or fluid or moisture would then come down, and people's bodies would start growing from this basically this bone. And then ثم ينفخ فيه أخرى فإذا هم قيام ينظرون. And then the horn would be blown into again. And that's when they would be standing and just looking around. It's so scary, to be honest, Ya Rabbi, Rabbi irhamna brahmto. Rabbi irhamna brahmto. Okay, so here he was basically saying, well, the evidence, ثم نفخ فيه أخرى. He was saying, well, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, then it was blown in it again. He said the pronoun in Surah Az-Zumar right there, ثُمَّ نُفِخَ فِيهِ أُخْرَى, that would tell us that this is not the blowing inside some images of people or the sculptures of people. This isn't talking, like I said, this isn't talking about an image meaning picture. Kind of like a picture of things right there. No, this is actually talking about these creatures that would, basically the humans, basically after they grew like plants. Okay, is that what's going to be blown in them? So he said, well, no, it's يُنْفَخُ فِيهِ أُخْرَى, meaning inside, and what is blown into is the horn. And فَإِذَا هُمْ قِيَامٌ يَنْظُرُونَ. What's the evidence that it's the horn? He said, because the ayah says ثُمَّ نُفِخَ فِيهِ أُخْرَى, and he said from that we would know that the pronoun is not referring to images or sculptures of people, or basically these human beings that grew like plants. Okay, let's see. And let's see what al-Qurtubi basically says about that one. And he said, وَالْأُمَمُ مُجْمِعَةٌ. He said all nations unanimously agreed that the one that is going to blow in the horn is Israfil. I don't really know if that's what Christians believe in. It would be quite interesting. I'll ask. And I don't know if that's what Jews even believe in. But that's what he's saying. I'll ask. I'll get you that piece of information tomorrow, inshallah. Let's see. Abu al-Haytham, he said, whoever من أنكر أن يكون الصور قرنا فهو كمن ينكر العرش والميزان والصراط. Okay, what did he say? He said, whoever denies that the horn that is blown into is a horn is exactly like the person that would deny the throne, the scale, or even the bridge on Judgment Day. As-Sirat, al-Mizan, and al-Arsh. In other words, that would be a kafir. So just knowing that one. Okay, Ibn Faris. Just a note, Ibn Faris is actually one of those dangerous scholars, I must admit. So what did he do? So Ibn Faris basically had a book I used to love reading in it. It's called Fiqh al-Lugha. It's almost in 6 volumes, give or take, 5, 6, somewhere around there. Can't remember exactly. And he would compare the words in Lugha Arabiya, and based on the sound, he would teach us how to know the meaning based on the sound. And he called it Fiqh al-Lugha. No, wait a minute. I thought fiqh was more into legislature. No, fiqh actually means to know something. So by looking at the sound and the place of articulation for the word, he would basically let you know how to know and learn the meanings by the sound and the place of articulation. Okay, let's see. What did he say? He said, الصور الذي في الحديث كالقرن ينفخ فيه. والصور جمع صورة. What is that? والصور جمع صورة. Okay, so he said الصور, basically this one. He said it is basically the one that is blown into, basically on Judgment Day, the horn. And the sur is also what would be a plural of image. And al-Jawhari, remember al-Jawhari? Every time I read about al-Jawhari, I feel so saddened. Remember, al-Jawhari was a scholar of Lugha Arabiya, but then he was getting the psychosis. You know, since we talked about before, we talked about mental illness. Believe it or not, al-Jawhari actually went into the severe mental illness. And he was so convinced that if he were to jump from a very high place, that he would still not die. So, yeah, he actually...
What?
Yeah, I know. He would not die. He was getting the psychosis. And that's how he died.
Oops.
He got into the severe mental illness, psychosis basically, and he jumped from this very high place and thought that he would still be alive. And he was told, he was hearing these sounds that were telling him that if he were to jump from a high place, he would still make it.
What kind of
mental illness is real? And yes, some mental illness has nothing to do with you being a good Muslim or a bad Muslim. Just keep that one in mind.
illness?
Yes, it's an illness. It's just like any other physical illness. Just like any other physical illness. Ya Rabbi afina wa ya'fi awladna, Ya Rabbi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and protect our children and protect all of your children and protect all of us.
ثبت علينا نعمة العقل والدين.
Ameen, Ya Rabbi. Ameen, ameen. Just imagine, you know, a great scholar like that. And it's quite sad. You know, you had a number of different cases that, you know, if you were to look at, you know, some of the scholars of the past, some of them did actually show mental illnesses, like schizophrenia. Who was that? That sha'ir, always the one that was, I can't remember his name. He was a poet, and he didn't even leave his house. He would barely leave his house, and he would always write poetry that is very pessimistic. Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri. Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri. You know, if you were to read his poetry and you were to read about his life, and he really believed that he was a prophet. And by the way, people with schizophrenia, they would not only have psychosis, but they would also believe that they were spoken to, chosen by God, and all of that. And yeah, you know, one time I had a girl that I used to teach, really. She was part of my students. But she, you know, was a long time that I hadn't seen her. And then she comes over. Well, she calls me and she says, there's something very dangerous that I have to talk to you about. And I can't talk over the phone. So I said, sure, you can come over. She comes over and she says, well, I actually got the wahi telling me that I'm al-Mahdi. I know we might laugh about it, but that's right on the spot. When she was telling me that, in the beginning, I was trying to convince her not, but then I right away remembered that no. You're going the wrong way. To try to convince them out of it, you're just wasting your time. You're literally wasting your time trying to convince them that she's not al-Mahdi and that that's not actually true and that it's nothing but, stahwathu shayateen, etc., or that it's basically just a mental imbalance or a chemical imbalance or whatever it is, and it's a sign and a symptom of psychosis and all of that. You're just wasting your time. The best thing that you could do is to basically get them into a clinic, basically to have a psychiatrist basically do their job with them.
Are they stubborn?
They're very stubborn.
Oops.
And the bad news is, especially like a place in America, they'll even if they might actually impose any danger and some danger onto the people that live with them, they'll tell you being crazy is not a crime. And believe it or not, the hospital would have them stay there for some time, but then the hospital will tell you the insurance doesn't pay for the treatment, and the insurance doesn't pay for them staying there, and they would basically have the legal right to make the decisions for themselves to actually leave the hospital.
We feel
They would say everybody in the hospital as they're the ones that are crazy. The doctors are the ones that are crazy, and it's not me. They will swear by the Quran that they're hearing the sounds and that these sounds are not fake and that they are al-Mahdi or they're Nabi or they're a prophet or they're God himself or whatever it is. And they'll swear by the Quran that they have these powers and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to them directly and all of that. It's a mental disorder. And certainly, is this coming from shaitan? Possibly. But, you could say that we had different cases, just like Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri and just like al-Jawhari, and there are many others as well. It's not exclusive to them, but there was mental illness. And, it's quite interesting that these people are actually smarter than the average person. Some of them actually had Nobel Prizes in mathematics or chemistry, or some of them had Nobel Prizes for being exceptionally smart. And 10% of those that are diagnosed with schizophrenia are geniuses. 1% of like you and I are geniuses. 10% of them.
Any test?
So wondering, in Lugha Arabiya we say between being a lunatic and being a genius is just a small hair, and that's basically.
Is there any test that we check our mentality?
على عقلك ما شاء الله عليك الله يهديك.
No. شككتينا بحالنا.
She's starting to doubt. She's like, wait a minute, should I get screened? الله يرحمنا برحمته. الله يا رب يديم علينا العقل. الله يديم علينا العقل. يا الله, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us and give us good mental health and give us good physical health and give us social health. يا ربي اللهم آمين.
آمين يا رب.
اللهم آمين. اللهم آمين. الله يرحمنا برحمته.
آمين. بس أحيانا في أشياء بتجنن.
Exactly. خلى الواحد شكك في عقله.
الحمد لله. الله يبارك فيك.
الله يبارك فيك. All right. So يوم ينفخ في الصور in Surah al-Naml as well. basically said يوم ينفخ في الصور, and الكلبي had said, I don't really know what a sur is. Wait a minute, so who's al-Kalbi anyways? He is a scholar, but some scholars actually debated his authenticity, at least in hadith. They rejected his, they rejected his at least narration in hadith, but not necessarily rejected his tafseer. Okay. So some scholars, like al-Kalbi, didn't know what it was. Well, other scholars would explain it. Okay. So ينفخ في صور الموتى. He said, and some scholars actually said that it would be blown in the images, meaning the sculptures of the dead, and their souls would come back to them. Okay, let's see. You know, it's quite interesting. والصور والصور جمع صورة. الصور is the plural of image, and the suwar is siwar. Okay, الصور and the suwar. You know what? In the Palestinian dialect, we actually say siwar, not suwar. And here he said siwar and suwar. That's basically the plural of an image. Okay. So we actually speak proper Arabic, I guess. Okay. And يوم ينفخ في الصور, in other words, في الصور. Though another قراءة basically said يوم ينفخ في الصور. In other words, the creatures. So there's another قراءة. Let's look at that one. Okay. يوم ينفخ في الصور. So what does that look like? يوم ينفخ في الصور. This one is ينفخ في الصور. In another قراءة, okay, he said قرأ عياض يوم ينفخ في الصور. ينفخ في الصور. That would mean in the creatures themselves. And he said, that is al-Qurtubi, he said what is intended بالصور in this ayah is basically the images of people. He said even though it is possible, but he rejected that one because of what was mentioned, basically whether in Surah al-Naml or whether it was in Surah al-Zumar. That we rejected that one. But of course, but he said, and the evidence is that Israfil alayhi salam would basically blow in the horn, and therefore the suwar, Allah Azza wa Jal, yuhyi suwar, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would resurrect basically the images or the human bodies basically, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فَنَفَخْنَا فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِنَا. So he was saying, that is al-Qurtubi, he was saying that Israfil would blow in the horn, but Allah would blow into the bodies to become human. But Israfil would blow into the horn. Okay. عالم الغيب والشهادة وهو الذي خلق السماء. We're just going to finish just this part and then we'll leave inshallah. عالم الغيب والشهادة. What is a عالم? عالم is a person that basically has ilm. Ilm is knowledge. Alim is the person that has the knowledge. So the one that has what type of knowledge? Al-Ghayb. So Al-Ghayb is basically the one to know everything that he had created in the heavens and the earth, and he would be Alimul Ghayb. He would basically know all the things that would be unseen and basically in the area of unknown to you. That is unknown to you. And some scholars actually recited yanfukhu. Yanfukhu, not yunfakhu. What would that mean? Yanfukhu to basically mean alimul ghaybi, where was it? وَلَهُ الْمُلْكُ يَوْمَ يَنْفُخُ فِي الصُّوَرِ, or يَوْمَ يَنْفُخُ فِي الصُّورِ, or ينفخ في الصور, or ينفخ في الصور. Now we I'm just basically looking at the different narration, the different qira'at right there. Okay? And right there, he said, yanfukhu would basically mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would blow in the people, or blow in order to that the horn would basically be blown into by the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, that doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would blow into the horn, but that would mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order Israfil to blow into the horn. Okay? So, alimul ghaybi, what do we have here? Alimul ghaybi. Okay, in this qira'ah, alimul ghayb. In another qira'ah, al-Hasan and al-A'mash, it's alimul ghaybi. So what is that? What's the difference in Lugha Arabiya? If I were to say alimul ghaybi and alimul ghaybi, what's the difference? If you were to say alimul ghaybi, that would basically give me that clarification. Alimul ghaybi, he is basically the one to know all the ghayb. Alimul ghaybi would basically be a badal. In other words, it would be basically as referring to this one. So lahu al-mulku alimul ghaybi, going back to lahul mulk right here. Since he is the one that has the ownership, he basically, here, this would basically replace and refer to the beginning of that statement, lahu. So it would be alim al-ghaybi, referring to the beginning of that statement, lahu al-mulk. Okay, that's basically al-badal an al-ha. Okay, so this is it. I know we have a lot that we talked about today. What did we talk about? We talked about mental illness. We talked about exorcism. We talked about Sur. We talked about Yawm al-Qiyamah. We talked about resurrection. We talked about Judgment Day. We talked about, I know we kind of went in so many different topics, but that's basically why Tafseer is beautiful. Tafseer is beautiful because you're not speaking about one topic, but you're letting those ayats basically take you into that tadabbur to see the different areas and how you would relate to those ayat. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Let's see right here. Let's see. She's saying, were they able to read and engage with the Quran without getting sick before, like that, doing that ruqya? Yes, they were capable. Some were capable. Believe it or not, I've actually had Hindus ask me to do ruqya for them. I've had I had a couple non-Muslims actually tell me that they were seeking ruqya, and I did the ruqya on them. Is it okay to do ruqya on a non-Muslim? It is. It's permissible. Do ruqya on them, just like in the hadith when they had went to this city or this village, and they had asked Abu Sa'id al-Khudri to basically read ruqya on their chieftain, and they read al-Fatiha 7 times. Remember that story? Okay. Was the man Muslim? If he were Muslim, would have definitely behaved like a Muslim and gave them some food and water at least. Okay, let's see. Ittal huwa nada. Absolutely, ittal huwa nada, and it's basically qatarat al-matar khabif, right? It's basically the mist. All right. So if there's anybody that would like to say anything or add something or correct me if I had basically mentioned something wrong, I mean, I'm a human at the end of the day. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves. I would love to hear you.
Yeah. Is the seizure same, it as a Sarah, as a mental illness?
Seizures are neurological, not psychiatric.
So it's treated by medicine?
Sarah? Yeah, they can give you medications to treat epilepsy.
I hear a long time about the epilepsy, that it's like a mess.
You know, here's the thing. Before, the tools that they had to diagnose things like especially neurological diseases, the tools that they had at the time were definitely limited. Okay. So right now they are capable of actually seeing through MRIs and through different brain scans and, you know, all those different scans. They're capable of actually seeing those chemical imbalances in the brain. And certainly, you know, depending on the reason why someone might have a seizure or an epilepsy or anything of that sort, some of it is curable. So the person would have to go to neurologists, and they would basically, you know, classify it, and they would work with them. But yes, some epilepsy or some seizures are curable, and certainly some medications have actually proven to reduce the number of episodes that some of those that would get seizures, they would basically, certain medications would reduce the number of episodes that these patients will be getting. So we already know that in science. Now, is that a result of shayateen? We're not saying that every single seizure is a chemical imbalance, but we also would say that some things that may look like seizures can be a result of shayateen. Do I have something like that based on text? Like we said earlier, the text itself is containing ambiguity, and therefore the ones to say, and the scholars that say that no, this is impossible, shayateen don't have any power not to inflict on causing a symptom like a seizure-like symptom or any of that sort, or move your hand or move your leg or etc. I would say certainly the text does contain ambiguity. So if somebody wanted to deny and say, I don't believe in exorcism whatsoever, that doesn't get them out of the fold of Islam, because the text itself is not direct. Okay, so there is قطعي الدلالة and there's the ظني الدلالة. قطعي الثبوت, sorry, قطعي الثبوت and ظني الدلالة. So قطعي الثبوت, there's no doubt that this ayah or that ayah, the ayah that we did before, that they are قطعية الثبوت. There's no doubt that this is an authentic resource. But is the indication and the interpretation ultimate and basically not containing any ambiguity? No, it can contain some ambiguity because it can actually be interpreted differently. Okay, why do I believe that exorcism is real? I didn't used to be honest. I only came to that conclusion, I would say, anecdotally. I had seen things right before my eyes. I would read the ruqya, and there's no way that, in fact, I did let them and tell them every single time I would get any case, I would always refer them to the, let's say, medical treatment along with the ruqya. I wouldn't just use the ruqya. I would say, I need you to see a neurologist or see a psychiatrist or whatever it is along with the ruqya. The ruqya, I wouldn't use that as my only method of treatment, but I would definitely tell that person to seek the different specialists within that field in order to make sure that this person is actually healthy. Many cases, you know, they would see neurologists, and the neurologist would say they're completely healthy, nothing of that sort. And I would read Quran on them, and you could definitely see right in front of you a person, and you would really not believe what I'm saying until you actually see it. You would not believe it till you see it. To be honest, I don't know how to prove to you something that you would really have to see it to believe it. Okay. I could only bring you a witness to, and tell you witnesses, this is what we had witnessed, to basically let you see it before your eyes. Okay.
Yeah, I saw my things after.
Yeah, that's all I could tell you. I mean, I cannot, I can't prove to you that I live in this address scientifically, right? But I can bring you probably some papers, and I can bring you a picture of me, etc. Tell you here, I live in this address. Okay. And that's, kind of like my experience. And that's all I can tell you. If you choose not to believe it, that doesn't get you out of the fold of Islam. You want to be rational, that's okay. You can go ahead. You don't have to believe it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you. Just make sure you keep on doing ruqya. Whether you believe in it or you don't believe in it, that's absolutely fine. You can say that you're very rational. Congrats. I used to believe that too. Until I saw something that not everything is understood with our own rational thinking and all of that. And yes, and I just had to admit that there are certain things that I cannot explain, and neither can the experts and the specialists actually explain. So I just had to submit to the fact that this reality that surrounds us in this world is far more than what our brains can comprehend. That's all I could say. There are so many things that are right there. That's all I could tell you. It's farther than what our brain can comprehend, what our tools could research and investigate and all of that. So whether it's scientific tools, whatever it is, so I'll just leave it at that. You don't have to believe it. That's okay. So yeah. If there are any questions or even comments, let's see. I joined when you were middle of discussing the qareen. Is that who we would refer to as shaitan on our left? So some scholars actually said that al-qareen is basically the shaitan on our left. Okay. And some scholars actually said al-qareen is not necessarily on your left, because al-qareen would surround you on all the directions. And al-qareen, the Prophet ﷺ basically said that every single person has a qareen, okay? And that this qareen would basically tell the person, they would never leave them, okay? And the Prophet ﷺ had said that every person has a qareen, and إِلَّا أَنَّ رَبِّي أَعَانَنِي عَلَيْهِ فَأَسْلِمْ or فَأُسْلِمْ or فَأَسْلَمْ. Okay. Did the Prophet ﷺ had a qareen? He had a qareen, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically helped the Prophet ﷺ, and his qareen became Muslim, or did his qareen basically get overcome? In other words, he surrendered, and the Prophet ﷺ was protected from al-qareen influence. So both فَأَسْلَمْ or
get secured, it means.
Right, that he was cured. Let's see. Why do some people reach that level that they assume that they are prophets? I don't know the answer to that question, because some people would reach to that level if they would relate to shayateen, okay? But other people may reach that level because of the influence of psychosis. But wait a minute, are these people held accountable? I'm talking about the people that are schizophrenic, for example, and they would believe that they are prophets, or they Mahdi, whatever it is, or super people, whatever it is. Are they held accountable? We don't know. We really don't know. Anybody that would tell you and give you a definitive answer, we don't really know how much of free will this person that is schizophrenic, how much of free will they have, and how much they're capable of, let's say, overcoming this thought, and whether this person is considered as a form of junoon mutbiq or junoon ghayr mutbiq. Is this absolute a type of losing the brain? Did this person really lose their mind, their control of their mind? Or is this person considered that didn't lose their ability to control their mind? In other words, are these people considered what we would call having a mental disability? Or is this person not having a mental disability? What does this even look like? Is this a mental disability? When we say disability, does this disable them from even processing legislature, aqidah, the world around them? Or is this not disabling them processing all of that? What does it disable them from? Is this a mental disability? What does it disable them from? Well, Islamically, if a person is disabled from thinking rationally, from understanding, from processing all of that, then in that situation, this person is not held accountable. Okay, but how far is this schizophrenic person? And of course, there are 4 different stages of schizophrenia. Okay, how far along is this person in controlling their rational thinking? The episodes, they would basically get into episodes of being, let's say, thinking rationally and behaving like a cured person. And sometimes they would basically not have that episode of being normal. When they're being, normal, okay? And let's say pseudo cured, because there's no cure for schizophrenia, okay? When they're actually in these moments, partially cured, okay? Does this mean that it would be similar to junoon غير مطبق, that this person is not in a stage of complete and an absolute type of mental disability? How much of that is there? Are they faking it? Are they taking advantage? All of those things, even a specialist may not have the answer to knowing whether this person is faking it at the moment or not. We know famous cases where they managed to fake mental illnesses to get away from crimes or get away from accountability. All right. Is this possible? It is possible. Even experts can sometimes basically miss on a diagnosis. But at the same time, when you look at, okay, accountability, if we're talking about accountability in our life as well, what about accountability in the hereafter? That's why we would leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We would leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them cure. That's it. We don't know. Let's see. The sister saying, can we say that they have not had ikhlas like shaitan and they ultimately? No, not necessarily. We can't necessarily accuse these people of not having ikhlas, because il-junoon is like a physical illness. Does that mean if somebody gets cancer that they just didn't have enough faith? No. How is the accusation of a mental disability different? Did they just have no ikhlas and that's why they got cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure? Did they just not have enough ikhlas? No, not necessarily. Same thing when we're talking about a mental disorder. It doesn't necessarily mean that these people, look at Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. He went into severe depression that affected his ability to see. Did it affect his ability to see? Did it affect his blood sugar, the sugar and high blood pressure or whatever? What affected him to getting something that affected his ability to see? Well, the ayah was really clear about it. It said, وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. The ayah was really clear about it, that what resulted in his inability to see was actually the severe sorrow that he was living in. You know, severe sorrow, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, trauma, that's what affected his ability to see. And people have different capacities in the amount of abuse or harm or trauma that they can endure. His body definitely couldn't handle it. Does that mean he lacked faith? He's the guy that was saying, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ اللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ. He's the guy that was given to us as the example of endurance, as the example of sabr. But then his body couldn't take it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's say, she also says, meaning I have seen people who were having ujb that led to arrogance. Okay, al-ujb is different. Al-ujb, arrogance and, you know, the ego and what they would call a narcissist today, okay? That's not a mental disorder. Arrogance or being a narcissist, you're not born a narcissist. You're raised, the different factors, they created within you this type of lack of discipline to be a narcissist and arrogant. Whether it's entitlement or whether it's authority that you probably had, or whether it's you marrying some narcissist person that basically led to this behavior, and this person thought that they could get away with it just like someone else, and thinking that they could mimic their behavior. Number of different things. Let the experts that studied that narcissist behavior and explain it to us. Okay, but that's not necessarily. Yes, definitely, it was spewed by shaitan, but that does not necessarily mean this is a mental disorder. A mental disorder basically malfunctions the person's ability to understand, to process, to relate, etc. That's a completely different thing. Narcissism is a behavioral disorder, not a mental disorder. It's a behavioral. They have behavioral issues that they need to correct. Okay. So I hope, let's see, she says, why seizures cases are a lot in US? Is it because they're leaking to ibadah or spiritual relations? I don't know if that is actually true, because in the US, it's just, in the US, whether the US, UK, France, Germany, they basically have better studies that would study these cases in basically better numbers. Okay, we're talking about almost 390 million, and you have universities, you have hospitals, etc. So they would basically keep track of those cases. Now, does that mean the Middle Eastern countries or third world countries that they don't have cases like that? It's not that they don't have cases like that. It's just that it's not tracked. They don't keep track of these cases. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have more. Then you would also need to study, I guess, the food, the lifestyle, all these different things, and probably the weather. I don't know. Maybe is walking and relationship to sun and all of that. I don't know why. So that we cannot relate it to jinn. Jinn is not more in the US than in Africa. All right. The jinn is not more in the US than in Africa, at least from what I think, right? Maybe that is true. I have no idea if there's somewhere in California, but yeah, this is irrelevant. But we wouldn't necessarily say that. You wanted to say something, Ukhtumaya, go ahead.
رياض الصالحين A long time read about this hadith that the husband, when he tried to make a relation, intimate relation with his wife, and he didn't say Bismillah, that shaitan يسبقه إلى رحمها أو يجلس أو يجلس على
Right.
إحليه.
So, these things, how do we make a note of that? How do we, whether it's visualize it, or how does that even happen, and all of that, and does that later on bring probably a case of a mental, or what we would call junoon, etc. We don't actually have any evidence to prove that. We just, a lot of these notes that were mentioned by scholars were more based on ijtihad and inference, and not the text itself literally saying that.
Yeah, because the people usually said that if someone or the son or daughter acting like معفرت, يقولوا هذا ما مسميين فيه, يعني his father didn't.
I know that some would say that, but that's that's the inference that some scholars had actually said. But because the hadith is the dua, اللهم جنبنا الشيطان وجنب الشيطان ما رزقنا. Okay, that's the dua.
Right.
Before intimacy, اللهم جنبنا الشيطان, Ya Allah, keep the shaitan away from us, and keep the shaitan away from what you had given us. Okay, so having that dua, they said the inference is when you say جنب الشيطان ما رزقنا, that shaitan could actually basically get a hold, control whatever you were given. In other words, the shaitan can actually control basically the child down the road if there was no dhikr done. Okay, that was based on the inference. But what does the control look like? Or does that just a moment where shaitan can actually have that effect? And then some would actually say that the reason why the baby is crying when he's first born is because shaitan basically slapped him. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
He's lying.
A slap from shaitan. Exactly. There's actually, there's really no evidence on that. You will find it in the books of let's say Islamic literature, okay, but that is not necessarily evident. In fact, if the baby is not crying when they are born, we would definitely be concerned. Why? Because the first thing we would want to hear is basically, a cry, because that's letting us know that they're getting air in and out, and their breathing is basically exactly that their lungs are functioning. And even if the baby is not crying, well, they'll slap his butt, basically. And it's like, you know what, you're going to cry. We need to hear that cry. And once the doctor hears that cry, they're like, okay, finally, the lungs are functioning well.
Yeah, if not cry, they hit him to cry.
Yes, I need you to cry. I need to hear
Push
that.
a lot of air to his lungs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so she said junoon means obsession. No, junoon does not necessarily mean obsession. It can mean obsession, but it could also mean a mental disability. And junoon comes from the root janna. The word, the letters jim and noon, when they're together, it means something is covered. So when you see majnoon, that means their brain is covered. Their brain is covered from being able to process. Just like when we would look at Janine, it's basically that the baby is covered basically in his mother's belly. Let's see. Do the people having OCPD should tell about their mental condition to their potential spouse, although their therapist said they're okay? So that's a good question. If the therapist said that they're okay, they don't have to say it. They don't have to let their potential spouse know it. But if there are certain symptoms that that the potential spouse is definitely going to be dealing with, and that it would basically help this person that has this case. It would help them to relate, to understand what they're going to be encountering. This person, if they are not aware of it, then they will doubt your intentions, they will doubt you and all of that. So I would recommend not the first time, not the second time, but down the road before having the marriage contract, not a day before the marriage contract, but definitely I would recommend that this person know that there is, let's say, a marker that this person has, and that they should be prepared at least to handle those episodes or those situations, and that they basically have symptoms that medically they were diagnosed with. And I think it would definitely be fair to make sure that this potential candidate, or basically, proposal, that he understands that there is a certain circumstance that, are you prepared to deal with this? This is what it looks like. Please read about it. If you're not capable of dealing with something like this, that, you know what, I guess that's absolutely fine. I'd rather you pull out now than actually pull out in the future, and probably increasing this mental condition, and probably make it worse. If this person is not prepared, if this person is not trained to understand the dynamics and the implication of this mental condition on the social relations and on their life, then they will make the case actually become worse. And it would definitely be from a mental condition to later on just throwing accusations on this person. So in order to keep this patient protected and make sure that they get a candidate, or let's say a potential person that comes in that is willing to embrace their situation, I would definitely be a transparent person with them to make sure that they are supporting me on this condition, rather than attacking me and attacking my intention after knowing down the road what this is, and then considering me that I cheated on them, or that I was cheating on them, or whatever it is, and that I should have told them that they are not prepared for it, that they didn't expect this, and then accuse you of what is called al-gharar. Al-gharar is a form of manipulation. Okay, so I would definitely recommend, not necessarily on the first day, but down the road, letting them know that this is a condition that you are getting treatment, or at least are working on, and that this is an episode that you might be getting, or a flashback or a flare or whatever they call it. So yes, I hope I answered that one. So if anybody would like to unmute themselves, that's okay too. MashaAllah, we had a good amount of people attending. I know we went into so many different topics and we definitely exceeded the limit. So this is it. I guess subhanakallah wa hamdika nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant.
Mhm.